This presentation will focus on the effects of low-load blood flow restriction resistance training on improving skeletal muscle hypertrophy and strength in healthy adults compared to heavy load resistance training. Resistance training is a proven exercise modality that effectively induces skeletal muscle hypertrophy and strength. These morphological and functional adaptations can improve an individual's locomotive ability and functional capacity. From elderly adults to high-level athletes, they all benefit from resistance training. It is widely accepted that conventional heavy load resistance training, which uses loads equivalent to 60 to 90% of an individual's one repetition max, is the gold standard training modality to enhance both skeletal muscle strength and hypertrophy. However, the use of a new training modality has recently gained attention due to its ability to produce similar muscular adaptations without the need of the high mechanical load. Blood flow restriction, or BFR, is the first exploration in using a hypoxic stimulus in resistance training. Pioneered by Dr. Sato, who created Katsu training, meaning training with added pressure, is now used all around the world and commonly referred as blood flow restriction training. Blood flow restriction training involves the application of inflatable cuffs to the most proximal region of the upper and/or lower limb, which would be just distal to the deltoids on the arms, for example. The blood flow restriction cuffs can be set at an optimal pressure to allow arterial inflow into the limb to be somewhat diminished, therefore limiting the amount of oxygen delivery to that limb. Blood flow restriction cuffs also occlude venous return at that same pressure, as the endothelium architecture of veins are easier to clamp down on. This is done in an effort to induce a localized hypoxic environment within the skeletal muscles, which alters the hemodynamics during training. Resistance exercise with low loads at around 20 to 40% of an individual's 1 rep max, in combination with blood flow restriction, has repeatedly been shown to induce muscular hypertrophy and strength in healthy adults. Furthermore, the magnitude of these muscular adaptations are similar to compared to heavy load resistance training. Needless to say, this novel exercise approach is becoming popular, and when combined with low loads, it is effective in enhancing muscular hypertrophy and strength. The architecture and metabolism of skeletal muscles are highly sensitive to both the mechanical and metabolic environment. Resistance training induced muscle anabolism occurs from the stimulation and activation of muscle protein synthesis, intracellular signaling pathways, satellite cells, and hormone secretion. Resistance training stimulates increases in muscle protein synthesis through the activation of two major intracellular signaling pathways: mammalian target of rapamycin, or commonly referred as mTOR, and extracellular signal regulated kinase, or referred as ERK. These signaling pathways are well-established key regulators that initiate muscle protein synthesis and hypertrophy. Additionally, resistance training stimulates growth hormone secretion. Growth hormone secretion releases insulin-like growth factor 1, which is known to possibly have an interactive effect towards muscle protein synthesis. Load-induced muscle hypertrophy is accompanied by myonuclear addition, which is in turn dependent on the satellite cell activation. Satellite cells are intramuscular resident stem cells, and when activated, give rise to nanoscent myotubules, all fused to existing muscle fibers, which induces muscle fiber hypertrophy. Evidence suggests that large increases in myofiber cross-sectional area in response to resistance training are dependent on the myonuclear addition. As previously touched on, the literature suggests it is heavy resistance training that provides the most effective stimulation and activation of these physiological mechanisms for muscular adaptation. As already mentioned, the use of low-load blood flow restriction training can elicit strength and hypertrophic adaptations that are achieved with high-load resistance training. The restriction of blood flow to and from the limb creates a localized hypoxic environment in the exercising tissue. This increases metabolite accumulation due to both the increased production in the more hypoxic state and the limited removal due to the blood flow restriction cuffs itself. Thus, there is strong evidence that supports it is the hypoxic stimulus of blood flow restriction that plays an important mechanistic role in these responses. Occluding venous return creates a pooling of metabolites and fluid within the limb itself. The trapped metabolites can potentially draw more fluid into the cells to equally create the osmotic gradient and thus further increasing the metabolic stress. It is proposed that these responses to this accumulation of metabolites are increases to skeletal muscle cell swelling. More research is still needed to further validate this response. However, the increases in cell swelling is suggested to increase signaling processes downstream, as the cell perceives this as a threat to its integrity and initiates processes to reinforce its structure. Low-load blood flow restriction training has also been reported to stimulate elevations in the endocrine responses. A study published by Takarada and authors in 2000 demonstrated after the use of low-load blood flow restriction training, growth hormone concentrations increased 290 times from baseline levels. However, a more recent study published by West and Phillips in 2010 presented findings which suggested that these exercise-induced growth hormone secretions only increase muscular strength and hypertrophy amongst growth hormone deficient individuals and not within a healthy population. Thus, worth mentioning, but potentially not the main determinant for the adaptation seen with this hypoxic stimulus. An upregulation of intramuscular signaling pathways such as mTOR and ERK have been reported during the use of low-load blood flow restriction training. Werboom in 2013 conducted a study that examined the activation of protein signaling pathways between participants who used low-load resistance training during unilateral knee extensions. In the study, one leg had the blood flow restriction cuff applied, and the other leg was left unrestricted. The results showed that the blood flow restricted leg had an upregulation of both mTOR and ERK signaling pathways post-exercise. Interestingly, this response was not observed with the same leg within the unrestricted leg. Literature suggests that this response is from the combination of both the increases in skeletal muscle cell swelling and endocrine responses. The hypoxic environment created by blood flow restriction can increase the activation and proliferation of satellite cells, and especially in long-term training programs, enhance the hypertrophic response. Nielsen and colleagues in 2012 reported that skeletal muscle cells per muscle fiber were 3 to 4 times higher after 7 sessions, whilst using low-load blood flow restriction when compared to baseline levels. Also worth mentioning, the magnitude of the responses appeared to be greater with multiple training sessions throughout the week as opposed to 1 or 2 sessions. Another effect of an increase in metabolic stress induced by the hypoxic stimulus are enhanced recruitment of fast-twitch type 2 muscle fibers. Blood flow restricted training is supported to recruit fast-twitch muscle fibers during the early stages of exercise, as opposed to the progressive recruitment of these fibers as the exercise intensity develops, meaning a greater portion of the muscles are active throughout the exercise and therefore undergoes a stimulation through adaptation. If more muscles are stimulated to adapt, in conjunction with an increased physiological environment for net muscle protein synthesis, we'll see increases in muscle cross-sectional area and therefore a larger muscle, and as a result, a stronger muscle. Blood flow restriction training has been also proven to be effective in a wide range of clinical/rehabilitational and exercise situations, from resistance training to aerobic training. and even the passive application of blood flow restriction cuffs have been shown to attenuate muscular dysutrophy during rehabilitation and or the effects of sarcopenia in the elderly. However, in regards to low blood flow restriction training for skeletal muscle hypertrophy and strength, the recommended protocol, which was adapted from Patterson and colleagues, are as follows. This can also be visually seen through a schematic done by Scott and peers in 2014. To find an optimal pressure, the use of moderate subocclusive pressures that are approximately 40 to 80% of arterial occlusion pressure is recommended. Resistance exercises are to be at loads of 20 to 40% of an individual's 1 rep max. When the loads are at approximately 20% of an individual's 1 rep max, the use of a 80% arterial occlusion pressure is required to elicit the same responses. The use of larger volume of reps is recommended, with literature suggesting 4 sets of 30, 15, 15, 15. The higher volume of reps is due to the ability of lifting lighter weights, as the individual has the ability to perform more repetitions. Additionally, the use of 30 to 60 second rest times with the restriction maintained throughout this period is recommended. The cuffs can be applied either unilaterally or bilaterally, and it is also recommended to use low blood flow restriction training around 2 to 3 times per week. So, which training modality is most effective to evoke skeletal muscle hypertrophy and strength in healthy adults? Is it heavy resistance training or low blood flow restriction training? A fairly recent 2018 meta-analysis published by Lixinadro and colleagues compared 13 studies on the magnitude of skeletal muscle strength and hypertrophy adaptations between high-load resistance training and low-load blood flow restriction training. The next slide will be interpreting these results from the analysis. In regards to muscle strength improvements, the results are presented on this forest plot and clearly show that increases in muscle strength favored heavy resistance training as opposed to low-load blood flow restriction training. Interestingly though, the magnitude of the hypertrophic responses was similar between heavy load resistance training and low load blood flow restriction training. It is also worth noting that these results were independent of potential moderators, which the meta-analysis identified being absolute occlusion pressure, cup width, and the use of an occlusion pressure prescription method. Thus, the main results from Lixinadro's and colleagues' 2018's meta-analysis are that the most superior training modality in increasing muscle strength is heavy resistance training. In addition, hypertrophic adaptations were effectively gained by using either training modalities. A more recent meta-analysis published by Gronfeld and colleagues in 2012, so 2 years later, compared 16 studies on the effect of blood flow restricted versus heavy load strength training on muscle strength. What was fascinating was the meta-analysis revealed somewhat opposing results to Lixinadro and colleagues' 2018's findings in regards to muscle strength. As seen on this forest plot taken from the meta-analysis, the results demonstrate that the difference in magnitude of muscle strength gain was not statistically significant between the two training modalities. Thus, low-load blood flow restriction training can provide a potent stimulus to improve muscle strength somewhat equally to what is achieved with heavy resistance training. Even though there is research to suggest that both training modalities are equally effective to a degree, most studies have shown, however, that heavy resistance training is the most effective training modality to increase muscle strength. Literature has suggested that this is due to a greater optimization of neural mechanism to be the main driver behind this response. Studies have shown that low-load blood flow restriction training does not increase muscle activation to the same degree as high-low resistance training, therefore cannot stimulate the complete pool of high-threshold motor units. This is further supported by several investigations demonstrating that the relative strength, i.e. the maximal strength per unit of muscle size, of muscles trained using low-load blood flow restriction training is not changed significantly from pre-training levels. Even though low-load blood flow restriction training has been shown to improve muscle strength, the percentage increase in 1 rep max strength is not larger than the increase in muscle size. Taken together, literature proposes that the changes in muscle strength following low-load blood flow restriction training are more closely related to the rapid increases in muscle hypertrophy as opposed to neurological adaptations. So, which training modality reigns superior for improving skeletal muscle hypertrophy and strength? Might be a bit straightforward, but it is heavy resistance training, which is the training modality that provides the most effective stimulus to elicit muscular adaptations within healthy adults. However, interestingly, performing heavy low resistance exercises that are followed by low load blood flow restriction exercises have been reported to significantly enhance a healthy individual's bench press and squat 1 rep max. Several investigations have supported the notion that the combination of both training modalities provides a potent stimulus for neural adaptations in conjunction with enhanced morphological responses. So, to summarize, from a practical standpoint, adults with special interest in increasing muscular strength benefit more from heavy load resistance training. However, when considering muscle hypertrophy, the combination of both training modalities seems equally effective. It is also important to highlight that low-load blood flow restriction training is a viable and effective alternative for those individuals with physical limitations to engage with heavy load resistance training. Furthermore, future research is merited to examine the neurological adaptations of low-load blood flow restriction training to potentially establish why muscle strength is not improved to the same degree as what is achieved with heavy load resistance training. Thank you for listening to my presentation.